state's third witness in the trial of the men accused of murdering footballer Senzo Meyiwa, that's Tumelo Madlala, has continued today to give his testimony. One of the things he's mentioned today, he says Kelly Khumalo, who was Meyiwa's girlfriend at the time, instructed security at her apartment block or residential area in Mulbarton not to allow police officers entry shortly after Meyiwa had been killed. Madlala is among the people who were inside the house where the football star was shot in 2014. 5 suspects are currently on trial. The state believes that they killed Senzo Meyiwa in a robbery. Let's get you more on the story. Cross to our reporter Linda Mnisi, who's live for us at the High Court in Pretoria. Linda, let's talk more about why it is firstly that Tumelo Madlala was at this Mulbarton residence with Kelly Khumalo and her mother.
Well, you'll remember, Tembegile, that initially he made mention that, they were at Kelly Khumalo's house when Senzo Meyiwa was shot, and from the hospital, they then went back to the house. But in the evening, after that entire incident or that entire scene, they were then escorted to Mulbarton. This is where he says he was visiting. The purpose of his visit was that he would also be spending some time in Mulbarton. He says it's not the first time that he was taken to this house in Mulbarton. He even goes as far as saying that there was a time when Kelly Khumalo even said that she would be selling the Fosloras home and would no longer be using it. So it also goes back to the statements that were said by Advocate Malisa Latefo that the people who were in the house did not sleep in the Fosloras home as suggested by Sergeant Thabo Musia, but were in fact taken to Mulbarton. That's where they in fact spent the night. You mentioned now that he reveals that, police would frequent that house, especially after that shooting. And there was one specific event or occasion where the police arrived at Mulbarton, and in order for them to access that particular property, they would have to, of course, reach out to the security, would then make a call. The call came through, and the security at the gate said that the police were there to speak to them. Let's take a listen to what then happened.
I think Babo is our born kilo or something because since that issue case, because I say I'm blind.
Okay. When the police were now inside, and as they were, I think Kelly must have seen them, and because they wanted to peep through the blinds, and that's when she instructed that the electricity should be switched off. Okay, what happened in your case?
Yes.
Yes, may I continue?
Yeah. Then after we switch off case, angazi ukuthi wafonela bani okwenzakalani because ngathi waphuma iorder thizini because bavele bahamba futhi nalabantu labo.
Awazi ukuthi ubani wafonela bani?
I think uyena uKelly wafona
ngathi because after the electricity was switched off, I don't know who did Kelly call, and then I think that a certain order then came out, and then they just left.
All right, so that's Tumelo Madlala, the close friend of Senzo Meyiwa. They're describing Tembegile, how that call was made, and then an order really came through, seeing or prompting the police to leave the property at the time. But Tumelo Madlala goes on to detail a number of visits that happened at that particular property. He says that Chico Twala, the father of Longwe Twala, who was also or has been placed inside the house by Tumelo Madlala himself, saying that his father did visit the house. He was one of the people that came to visit that particular property. He says on that day, Kelly Khumalo was not fine. She had been crying, and he remembers this day because he was also not fine. He had also was also crying on that day, especially after what had happened. And there was something that he overheard from Chico asking Kelly Khumalo. Let's take a listen.
Angayisho ngamalanga ukuthi kweliphi ilanga but while things akhona eMulbarton kube kwafika uChiko Twala.
I'm just not sure about the day, my lord. But whilst I was still in Mulbarton, Chiko Twala arrived.
Yeah, just a minute.
Chuthi Kelly ngwana Kelly wayekhala kulawo malanga le nami ngingekho right chuthi uye watshela uChiko ukuthi no umngane wakaSenzo lona.
Okay. Because Kelly was crying during those days, and I was also not well. So she's the one who informed, that is now Kelly, informed Chiko that this is Senzo's friend.
Yeah. Can you just explain who's Mr. Chiko Twala?
Umukhuluma ngoChiko Twala ubani?
Ubaba waka Longo.
Longo's father.
Yes.
Yebo.
Okunye okuningi ngamuzwa ekhuluma noKelly embuza ukuthi akafuni ukuthi aye holding or something pressure nana.
I heard him speak to Kelly, inquiring from Kelly if she wasn't interested or didn't she want to go overseas for some holiday.
Very briefly, Linda, let's talk about Tumelo's relationship with Senzo Meyiwa. He's described himself, as I understand, as the late football player's best friend, but we've heard the family speak quite publicly about how they feel pained about the fact that he did not return immediately to KZN after his friend had been shot and killed, and he's explained that to some extent today.
Absolutely, he's explained that to some extent, saying that among some of the things that, made them to stay was the fact that police had confiscated their phones, and he couldn't go back without his phone. He couldn't go back home to Durban without his phone. And he explains also the statements that were taken. He says there were quite a number of statements that were made at the time, and that, the people that were taking those statements, or the investigators that, were taking those statements, would even go as far as threatening him. He says that he spent quite some time in that Mulbarton property where police had been coming. There were quite a number of visits that happened. He also says that he remembers that at some point there was a guy, he describes him as a guy who came to that property by the name of Akumzi, saying that they spent quite some time, but it wasn't his first visit in that house. He had been there before. It was his second visit. And this is where he would usually, sleep when he visits Joburg. So he's then described a very close relationship that he had with Senzo Meyiwa.
Thank you very much for that, Linda. Mnisi at the High Court in Pretoria, where the trial of the 5 men accused of murdering Senzo Meyiwa will resume at 2 o'clock.